Welcome back now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says he will no longer seek dialogue with India. In an interview with the New York Times, Khan said India mistook Pakistan's peace overtures for appeasement, adding there is no point talking. Khan has also demanded that the US peacekeepers and observers be allowed in occupied Kashmir, where India intends to carry out genocide.
The Pakistani Prime Minister said India is denying Kashmiris their right to observe religious practices, including the recent Eid al-Adha festival. He drew attention to the abuse and violence suffered by millions of Kashmiris living under Indian occupation. Speaking on the first International Day for Victims of Violence based on religion, Khan said the world must prevent the impending Indian genocide of Kashmiris. Pakistan's Foreign Ministry spokesman Dr. Mohammad Faisal said Indian forces killed 4 Kashmiris in search operations just last week. He said scores of others were injured by the Indian occupation forces. Faisal urged the international community to take notice of Indian atrocities in the occupied valley. Meanwhile, the UN has once again called for talks between Pakistan and India to resolve the crisis sparked by New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the disputed region is governed by the UN Charter and Security Council resolutions.
Sweden has called for a comprehensive investigation into human rights violations by Indian occupation forces in Kashmir. Denmark and Norway also say they are closely monitoring developments in the occupied valley. In a telephone conversation, Denmark's Foreign Minister Jeppe Sebastian said Copenhagen supports the UN and EU statements on Kashmir. Ford urged Pakistan and India to start a dialogue and refrain from further escalation. Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström called for a dialogue to resolve differences between Pakistan and India. Norway's Foreign Minister Mary Eriksson Søreide expressed concern over the situation in occupied Kashmir after its annexation by India on August 5th. She urged Pakistan and India to de-escalate the situation and ease tensions. As the world marks the first International Day for Victims of Religious Violence, Kashmiris endure the 18th day of India's lockdown of the occupied valley. Several Kashmiris have been killed and more than 4,000 detained since India revoked Kashmir's special status on August 5th. More in this report.
The disputed Himalayan state of Kashmir has been turned into a prison by Indian occupation forces. For the last few weeks, a crushing curfew has brought life to a shuddering halt. Robbed of their basic human rights, Kashmiris could not observe the religious festival of Eid al-Adha. Residents say they are hostages in their own houses.
Everything over here is under the police's watch and everything has been shut as if we were in jail. Small children have been shut in lockers. It feels as if we are locked down.
Cut off from the world by a total communications blackout, Kashmiris have been gagged and prevented from expressing their rejection of India's annexation. Over 1 million Indian troops have been deployed in occupied Kashmir since New Delhi violated UN resolutions by revoking the status of the disputed territory.
Meanwhile, international NGO Genocide Watch has issued a genocide alert for Indian occupied Kashmir. It called upon the United Nations and its members to warn India not to commit genocide in Kashmir. The NGO noted early signs of massacres in the occupied valley, stating a precedent of genocidal massacres with impunity. The organization warned of a blackout of communication since India's revocation of Kashmir's autonomous state. It underscored the threats posed by ruling BJP's Hindu nationalist ideology and heavy military presence. The organization also highlighted human rights violations, including torture, rape, detentions. It expressed concern over the arbitrary arrest and deportations of Muslim political and human rights leaders. Moving on, Abdullah Hamdok has been sworn in as Sudan's new Prime Minister as the country embarks on a 3-year transition to civilian rule. The economist was appointed by the leader of the newly formed 11-member Sovereign Council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The US, Britain and Norway have welcomed Hamdok's appointment, calling it a historic moment for Sudan. Talking to reporters in Khartoum, Hamdok said his priorities are achieving peace and solving Sudan's economic crisis. The new Sovereign Council replaces the military junta that took charge in April after popular protests forced the removal of President Umar al-Bashir. General Burhan will lead the council of 6 civilians and 4 other military officers. The new government will run the country until general elections scheduled for 2022. 7 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants have been killed during security operations in southeast Turkey. The Interior Ministry says the operation was carried out to protect Turkish Petroleum Corporation workers. It says 5 terrorists were killed during the operation in Mardin province. 2 others were killed in an air-backed counter-terrorism operation in Sirnak province. Earlier, 3 Turkish soldiers were killed and another wounded in a PKK attack in Silopi. Ankara accuses the PKK of killing some 40,000 people during the insurgency it launched in 1978. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the US is in a position to deploy a new land-based cruise missile in Romania and Poland. After a meeting with his Finnish counterpart, Sauli Niinisto, Putin said Moscow will respond in an appropriate manner to the move. He said Washington will not inform the European Union of the deployment. The US says it has no plans to deploy new land-based missiles in Europe. On Monday, the US conducted its first ground-launched cruise missile test after pulling out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia and China have asked the United Nations Security Council to meet today to discuss a cruise missile test conducted by the US on Sunday. They have asked UN Disarmament Affairs Chief Izumi Nakamitsuto to brief the 15-member body. Moscow and Beijing say Washington's plan to develop and deploy medium-range missiles are a threat to international peace and security. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zheng Shuang says the US is stalking a new global arms race. It says the US action will lead to a new Cold War and have a negative impact on regional and global security. Earlier, Russia said it will respond to the US cruise missile test. This US test is the first since it pulled out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty earlier this month. Now, European leaders say Russia needs to resolve the Ukraine crisis before it can rejoin the G7 nation. This follows US President Donald Trump's call to redemit Russia to the bloc ahead of its summit on Saturday. French President Emmanuel Macron says readmitting Russia without resolving the Ukraine issue will be an error. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas also called for Russia and Ukraine to revive peace talks before the measure could be considered. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it was too early to start considering Russia's inclusion.
Given the continuing instability, civil war, the war in Ukraine, given Russia's provocations, not just in Ukraine but in many other places, I must say I am very much with Chancellor Merkel in thinking that the case has yet to be made out for Russia to return to the G7.
The United States has passed a new rule allowing officials to detain migrant families together indefinitely. Previously, authorities could hold illegal migrants' children in detention only for a 20-day limit. The US President Donald Trump said the new rule will keep families together. Trump said he is concerned about the increasing number of undocumented children attempting asylum in the United States. He also said his administration was seriously looking at ending the right of citizenship for children born to non-citizens within the U.S. The Mexican Foreign Ministry has expressed concern over the move. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has praised Denmark's cooperation as a U.S. ally. This comes after President Donald Trump cancelled his visit to Denmark because it rebuffed his suggestion of buying Greenland. In a phone call to Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod, the Secretary of State Pompeo praised Denmark's contribution to global security. The U.S. State Department says Pompeo and Kofod also discussed strengthening of bilateral cooperation in the Arctic. Earlier, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen regretted Trump's decision to cancel his visit. She said the cancellation will not affect cooperation between the two countries.
It is with regret and surprise that I received the news that President Trump has cancelled his state visit to Denmark on the 2nd and 3rd September. I had been looking forward to the visit. Our preparations were well underway. It was an opportunity, I think, to celebrate Denmark's close relationship to US.
President Trump was scheduled to hold talks with Mete in early September. Now moving on, Kosovo lawmakers voted to dissolve parliament on Friday, paving the way for a national election. This follows the resignation of Prime Minister Ramush Haradinaj in July. A total of 89 deputies voted to dissolve the 120-seat parliament. An election should take place within 45 days. Haradinaj stepped down after being summoned by a special court in The Hague to face charges arising from the Balkan War of the 1990s. This could lead to the postponement of the EU-mediated summit next month. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. 9 people have been killed after heavy downpours and mudslides battered China's southwest Sichuan province. State media says 35 more are still missing from Aba, Tibetan and Xiyang. Aba's Emergency Management Bureau says over 1,600 rescue workers are looking for the missing. It says more than 100,000 people need to be evacuated from the area. Torrential rains have damaged roads, bridges and some 900 houses over the past 3 days. South Korea says the US and North Korea may soon resume denuclearization talks. But Pyongyang says it has no interest in dialogue as long as Washington and Seoul persist with military provocations. South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor revealed the resumption of talks after meeting with US envoy Stephen Biegun. But North Korea's foreign ministry says a US cruise missile test and its delivery of the 2 F-35 stealth warplanes to South Korea are dangerous. In a statement, Pyongyang said it is committed to resolving all issues through dialogue, but would not accept talks accompanied by military threats. Denuclearization talks have stalled since the failed Hanoi summit between North Korea's chairman Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump in February. In Indonesia, over 1,000 security personnel have been sent to the rest of eastern province of West Papua. A riot started when Papuan students were detained after allegedly disrespecting the Indonesian flag on the country's Independence Day. An insurgency against Jakarta's rule has simmered for decades, accusing security forces of rights abuses against Papua's ethnic Melanesian population. Following the students' arrest, the region has seen street battles between police and demonstrators who torched buildings. Riot police fired warning shots at the protesters who pelted shops and homes with rocks. Protesters have also set a market on fire and destroyed ATM machines. Police have arrested over 45 people, including some of they accused of masterminding the protests. Over to Yemen, where the UN has warned critical aid programs will be jeopardized if $1 billion of pledged funds are not released. It has described the situation in Yemen as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The UN says food rations for 12 million people in the war-torn country would be reduced if new funding does not arrive in the coming weeks. Earlier this week, donors pledged to give over $2.5 billion to meet the urgent needs of Yemenis. But the UN says less than half of the committed money has been received. Meanwhile, the Arab coalition fighting in Yemen says it has shot down 2 Houthi rebel drones targeting the southern city, Saudi of Khamis Mushaid. The rebels have not yet confirmed the incident. Now, Nigeria has marked 3 years free of endemic polio. Health officials say the progress can help declare Africa polio-free early next year. For details, watch this report.
Polio is a highly infectious disease, mainly affecting children under the age of 5. Africa's last case of wild polio was recorded in Nigeria 3 years ago.
Today, the 21st day of August 2019, Nigeria makes history, having achieved 3 years without a case of white polio virus WPV. The last white polio virus case was isolated in a child in Borno State on the 21st of August 2016.
Health officials are keen to sustain the historic gains.
We must remember that the battle is not over yet. We have to maintain our efforts and intensify them to make sure the historic gains are sustained and that polio-free certification is obtained for Nigeria in due time next year.
Since Nigeria's last case, the government launched many extra vaccination campaigns and improved surveillance and routine immunization. To begin the process of certifying the continent polio-free, a team of independent scientists will examine data from all 47 countries.
The World Health Organization says microplastics contained in drinking water pose a low risk to human health at current levels. The UN agency says more research is needed to reassure consumers. More in this report.
Studies in recent years on plastic particles detected in tap and bottled water have sparked public concern, but the World Health Organization says the limited data appears reassuring in its first report on the potential health risks associated with ingestion. The current and available studies on the toxicity of plastic parts are limited. Microplastics pose 3 threats: physical, chemical, and the third is about bacterial colonization.
Well, after having reviewed all the data, I think our message is one of reassurance to potentially worried consumers, and that the health risks that were assessed to be low, given what we've seen. But we also believe that a lot more research needs to be done.
The World Health Organization's report says despite the flaws with worst-case scenarios, it is confident that the risks remain low should some data change. Microbial pathogens include human and livestock waste entering water sources that cause deadly diarrheal disease in countries lacking water systems. Some 2 billion people drink feces-contaminated water, causing nearly 1 million deaths annually. The World Health Organization's coordinator for water and sanitation says the focus of regulators around the world should be on this.
I think for consumers, I think, drink your tap water if you have a good supply, a nicely regulated supply, enjoy it. Don't be worried about bottled water either. If you're a regulator, we're not recommending that you set standards and call for routine monitoring. And if you're a water supplier, please focus on known risks.
A WWF study says the largest source of plastic ingestion is drinking water, but shellfish are another major source.
Russia has launched an unmanned rocket carrying a life-size humanoid robot that will spend 10 days on the International Space Station. The Fedor, with identification number Skybot F-85, is the first ever robot sent to space by Russia. Fedor took off in a Soyuz rocket today from Russia's Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The silvery anthropomorphic robot stands 1 meter 80 centimeters tall and weighs 160 kilograms. Fedor copies human movements, a key skill that allows it to remotely help astronauts carry out tasks while they are strapped into an exoskeleton. It will dock with the space station on Saturday and stay there till September 7th. No humans are traveling in the Soyuz spacecraft in order to test a new emergency rescue system. Now, Brazilian slackliners have taken the sport to new heights. Thrill seekers balance and walk mid-air on lines tied between abandoned buildings in Sao Paulo. How do they do this? Watch this report.
Slacklining is a sport involving walking on a strap suspended in the air tied between two anchors. It's normally practiced just shy of a few meters off the ground in local parks. Enthusiasts in Sao Paulo have kicked it up a notch. Slackliner aficionados say that the sport gives them peace and balance in their lives.
I slackline because it gives me peace, equilibrium in my life. I did not have equilibrium in my body. I taught myself patience, focus, concentration to not give up. I might fall a number of times, but I'll get back us and cross the other side.
Slacklining groups have become popular in Sao Paulo, providing Paulistas with some respite from their day-to-day jobs. Some long abandoned and partly constructed buildings in the city's outskirts have become their favorite haunt.
It's great because those on the street think that this building is abandoned, but it's not. They look up and see that there are people practicing this sport. Many people look up in admiration. They're providing joy for this abandoned space.
Afterwards, life goes back to normal in the teeming megalopolis.
Now in the business story, stock markets in Asia and Europe have slid on uncertainty about US interest rate cuts. London's FTSE 100 led losses in early trading, tracked by the CAC in Paris and Frankfurt's DAX index. In Asia, overnight gains in New York were overshadowed by news that manufacturing activity in Japan slipped for a fourth consecutive month in August. Exports fell at a sharper pace, reversing early gains on the Nikkei 225. The Shanghai Composite also closed flat. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index dipped 1% as nervous investors sought more clarity on the US Federal Reserve Bank's stimulus plans. The Kospi closed down 0.2% after South Korea's central bank warned Japanese export curbs could have a bigger than expected impact. Now let's have a look at the weather update across the world. Well, that's all for now. For more news, Indus News.